Dr. Stephanie, and I'm sharing a little bit about our research, why we're doing research on neurodiverse Christian couples. So this is my little book that when I'm researching something and I find an article, when you're doing academic research, you're not just relying on articles and blogs. It's very important to look up peer-reviewed journals, to look up academic sources. So I'm in process right now of kind of collecting that data and information for something that's called the literature review or the introduction when you're writing research. So I am about just deep in the research right now in better understanding adult autism and formerly called Asperger's. And so I wanted to kind of share for you the why we are doing some of the research. So with the changing diagnostic rates, right? The rates have changed, the criteria has changed, the autism terminology has changed, especially from 1994 to 2015. If you're reading the information in the research, you'll see this phrase called the lost generation. The lost generation is anyone who would have met the criteria for Asperger's, but was born before 1994. And so under the old diagnostic criteria of the DSM-2 and 3, autism was usually associated with cognitive impairment or what was then called mental retardation. Also, some of the early research of autism had autism under a schizophrenic kind of pathological disorder. So its origin even into the DSM is because it was once thought to be like a childhood form of schizophrenia. So as information changed, then autism, just like ADHD and learning differences and challenges, are in the autism spectrum, which is a learning developmental delay category, and of course not schizophrenia or any form of mental health. So also people ask us, where are we on kind of our stand of neurodiversity and disorder and all of that? So I thought I'd kind of take a little bit today to talk about that. I kind of see there are two unhealthy fringe groups in the autism movement. There are those who see autism only as a disorder or a disease or a condition. And in their advocacy of autism and awareness of autism, it is about curative language, neurotypicalization language. It's focused on the things that are wrong with it and why we need to fix it. And there's speech of we need to eradicate it. And even some of the movements that are trying to figure out the genes and the genetics are maybe to offer that as part of something you could get as a screening to eradicate it, like people are trying to eradicate Downs and other genetic issues that are out there. So that is a fringe group over here. It's very medical, it's very disability, it's curative, and I think it's a fringe over here. Then over here in the neurodiversity movement, which I am part of the neurodiversity movement, but there is like a fringe toxic space over here that says the world should change for me. Because of who we are in our group, leave us alone, don't give us supports. Well, give us supports and give us accommodations, but don't teach us skills. Don't try to tell us anything needs to be worked on, kind of leave us be. So there's a very wide range of kind of curative, highly disability, just don't have any expectations or hope for this child or this person, to leave us alone, we're the next stage of evolution. Both I think are fringe, and I draw from the positives of each. Okay, so from this movement over here, the only thing is sometimes the people on this side who are saying, leave us alone, leave us be, we are the world, we're the next stage of evolution, are usually people who are autism level 1, HFA, or Asperger's syndrome, people who have the capacity usually to live independently. And so that is not representative of the entire spectrum. There are families who are living with different levels of autism who have greater levels of impairment, greater levels of challenges. They're in greater needs of support. There might be cognitive and mental delay or severe challenges. And so to say, don't give any supports or don't try to help, or there's nothing that's disabling or a disability, I don't think that's 100% accurate. I think if you're a parent of a child or a person who's autism level 2 or 3 and needs more supports, then there's going to be a disability aspect. If something doesn't have a disability aspect, then there's no reason for an ADA accommodation or 504 or IEP plans. So I think I draw from, I believe that we need all types of brains to do all types of things. We need those brains that are dyslexic and ADHD, who maybe have a learning challenge here, but tend to be really great over here. Autism, Asperger's, all of these brain types are really important. One of the jokes I always love to hear Dr. Temple talk about when I hear her speak, she said, back in the caveman days, all the neurotypicals were the yakety yaks. They just sat around the fire, sharing story, yakety yakking. But it was us autistic folks that first brought them fire, probably invented the wheel, and were figuring out a way to get out of the cave, probably from all the yakety yackers. Right? So there's a reason we have all the different types of brains that we have. And I do believe that God made neurodiverse brains. And I do believe that there are great reasons and strengths and differences brought by different types of brains. However, at the core of autism spectrum is developmental delay, a difference or disorder. And I think what that D stands for, I think that really depends on the person. For some people that are more level 2, level 3, or more highly impacted, then maybe it is more of a autism spectrum disability or autism spectrum disorder. But where the greatest difference is going to lie, especially in the clientele that I work with, is going to be social emotional reciprocity. So we do know the brain scans show it, the research shows it. So especially for adult relationships, this is where the crux of the matter is, social emotional reciprocity. So if you're way out here on the fringe and you're like, well, then neurotypical should just kind of bow down and do whatever we say, then maybe you don't want to marry a neurotypical person, right? And if you're way over here and you think that autism is a disease or a horrible thing, maybe you shouldn't marry an autistic person or a person on the spectrum. So maybe that's a matter of choice. But most adults, they've gotten married, they've had children, this lost generation who are about 30 years and older, who kind of missed for the 1994 diagnostic criteria. You got married and then things kind of went awry. There's different communications, different needs for emotional supports. Each person has different needs, right, wrong, or indifferent. There's different needs for autonomy, different needs for relatedness. And so that's where the neurodiversity in the relationship is going to be a problem. That is where there's a lot of unintentional. One of the men that I interviewed said benign neglect. One man said unintentional abuse. These things, just not knowing what you don't know and thinking that everyone thinks like me, and if I don't need it, then my spouse doesn't need it. That's where we're going to have problems in our neurodiverse relationships. So it's only been in about the last 10 to 12 years that there has even begun some kind of academic peer review on neurodiverse couples. What's been out for a really long time, and it's really disappointing that it hasn't informed a lot of research. But clinicians such as Dr. Tony Atwood, who has been researching in this field for a really long time, Maxine Aston, Ashley Stanford, a lot of women's first-person accounts of being in a neurodiverse relationship, men writing from their perspective, women writing from their perspective. There's been a lot of books, blogs, articles, websites out there, but it hasn't really started informing a lot of good research. And part of that is because the clinical community really doesn't think that it's a really big impact. They really don't think that there's a lot of people who are neurodiverse who are getting married and having families. They really just don't see it as a big enough deal to change their modalities, to change their therapeutic outlooks, to look at more maybe problem solution therapy. So that's the main problem. So there has been some research that is up and coming. And so we even had Dr. Carrie Mitrin on the show to talk about her research. She researched clinicians who are in the field, who have done training specifically in this field. And so our heart at International Association of Neurodiverse Christian Marriage is there's another subpopulation of this marginalized population. So here's neurodiverse couples. Here's us neurodiverse Christian couples, and there's not any research and there's not anything out there for us. And here's part of the problem. I said it in one of the segments I did on books I like and why I recommend them. A lot of the books in Christian counseling really are not research-based anyway. They're based on someone's calling, their ministry, something they feel the Lord shared with them, their particular marriage theology or doctrine. And so when you enter now a neurodiverse Christian relationship and you're handed one of those books and your neurology is not taken into consideration, it usually is going to cause more harm than good. And sometimes pastors and Christian counselors are some of the last to get on board for understanding that they need to update their training and skills, that they can't just pull out a Bible or pull out a Christian book and tell you to pray more, submit more, and have more sex. That's not going to solve your very complex needs and challenges. So that's the heart of why we're doing our research. But I wanted to share another reason why there is not a lot of research on neurodiverse Christian couples, and that is because of a myth that people on the spectrum tend to not be religious or have faith. And so I want to kind of read some of the findings that I found. A lady by the name of Stephanie Pappas, this was in 2012. She was kind of writing a review of some of the literature that is out there, some of the research about autism and faith or autism and religion. And it's a popularly held belief in the scientific community and in the clinician community that, I'll read the quote, the more traits one has of autism, the more cognitive and analytical a brain is, the less likely that person is to believe in God. Now, another set of researchers stated they believe people on the autism spectrum lack theory of mind so much they lack intuitive skills, and they lack something called a theory of self. So I don't even know who I am. So how do I know? How can I relate to a God or a supernatural or a deity out there? So, I mean, up through the leading research, up through 2012, 2015, most are saying that people on the spectrum tend to be scientists, tend to be logic and analytical brained, wouldn't understand, they might understand religion, but would not understand Christianity or faith or interacting with a God, and they certainly wouldn't believe in a supernatural being. Well, that's a problem because all of my clientele are neurodiverse Christian couples. They are people of great faith. And so I liked what this researcher, her name is Bushtian, in 2017, she said, scholarly research is talking about this absence of self in autism, but they're not talking to autistic Christians and autistic persons to better understand their experience of faith. She said, maybe they have a construct that is distinctively Christian in their understanding through their neurodiversity, a distinctively Aspie understanding of God. There's another researcher who researched someone who was Jewish and talking about faith and religion. And so he said, this is another way to look at what is the research out there saying. The stuff that's out there right now might not be accurate. So while the research is kind of burgeoning and there has been some good training out there, I love the work of AANE and I respect the work of AANE in training more people in neurodiverse relationships. However, some of the things that are recommended, we cannot do in the Christian faith. So in the Christian faith, we cannot have emotional affairs. We cannot open our marriage up to an open marriage. I personally feel if you're having to open your marriage up to a third party to bring happiness into your marriage, I'm not quite sure that's a healthy solution. We don't in Christianity believe in porn and masturbation. So some of the things that are brought up in techniques in the secular field just are not going to work in a covenant-based Christian marriage. So the International Association of Neurodiverse Christian Marriages is trying to focus on research specifically towards our subpopulation or culture in neurodiversity, which those who are faith-based in covenant relationships, who want with every ounce of their being to commit to their vows and keep their covenant. But then we also have to look at things when there's abuse, intentional or not, that has to be addressed in relationships. And sometimes when there is abuse or unrepentant pornography, which we believe is adultery, then sometimes people have to make alternate decisions about their marriage. So with neurodiverse Christian couples, the literature that we're trying to bring to the table is a better understanding of not just neurodiverse couples, but how we who are Christians, people of faith, what makes our situations a little more nuanced and complex. That's also why we have the NeuroDiverse Christian Couples podcast. So if you're not listening, I hope you find us. It's on Mental Health News Radio platform. You can find it on all your favorite podcast platforms. We interview people, Dan and I share our experience, and we'll be sharing little bits and pieces of our research as well. Thank you for joining me today.